It's a great beginning to this event. We hope that we'll be able to cover a lot of the subjects that were put up on that video. And so let us begin. Very, very good morning to everybody, all the people on the panel and all the people who are listening in. Thank you all very much for coming here today for this discussion. Today we will chat with top leaders of the automotive industry on reimagining the product and the go-to-market strategy. Good discussion to have. I am Alokesh Bhattacharyya. I'm senior editor of the Economic Times. I am joined by my colleague Suchetana.
Hi everyone, very good morning to all of you. Thank you for taking the time to join us here. I'm Suchetana. I am a senior assistant editor with the Economic Times. I welcome all of you to today's discussion. We hope and I'm looking forward to some sharp insights from our panelists on how the automotive industry is facing several transformational tipping points, including the impact of COVID on all your businesses.
Yes, but at the same time, we will also go much beyond COVID impact, and we hope to cover a wide range of interesting subjects. So we have a very powerful panel here today. Let's have a quick round of introductions. We have Martin Schwenk, who's the MD and CEO of Mercedes-Benz India. M. Venkatram, the country CEO and managing director of Renault India.
We also have with us as Vijayanand, CEO Amara Raja Batteries, Rajeev Chaba, President and MD, MG Motors India, Ashwath Ram, Managing Director, Cummins India.
And we have from Accenture, Dipti Vaishnav, Managing Director, and Raghu Gullapalli, Managing Director of APAC and LATAM. And from BCCL, we have Sudha Natrajan, Director of BCCL. Thank you all very much, panelists, for taking time for this deliberation. To just set a little bit of context, the Indian automobile market has really come a long way. I still remember the days of the Ambassador and the Premier Padmini. I used to own one. My father used to own one, actually. But it's from those humble days, Indian auto has come a very long way. Today it's the fourth largest automobile market in the world. But in the past year and a little more, it has been facing some severe headwinds. GST, fuel regulations, and the overall economic scenario has cast a long shadow on the industry.
In fact, in FY20, domestic sales have fallen across all categories. Passenger vehicles, if you see, fell 18%. CVs fell 29%, three-wheelers fell 9%, and two-wheelers fell 18%. The overall market shrank by almost 18%.
In the midst of that massive fall, there were two very, very small bright spots, if you look at from an annual thing, which were basically utility vehicles or the SUVs, and in the medium and heavy commercial vehicles, the passenger carriers. These two grew marginally around 0.5% and 1.65%, so they were not in the red in 2019-20, but that's not much to shout about. Another, among the visible bright spots were the introduction of mass market SUVs, such as the MG Hector, Hyundai Venue. These cars, they charted very strong numbers based on this connected car paradigm.
The coronavirus pandemic has only made the situation perhaps worse, with April and May seeing 90% fall in sales and June just about scratching the surface of sales. With the lockdown being gradually eased, July worked better, as we've seen. Companies like MG Motor, Renault clocked growth of 40% and 75% respectively, and they are perhaps the only bright spots in this very dim market. The market leader Maruti Suzuki, as you know, showed marginal growth of just 1.3%, driven by sales of its SUVs.
Shouldn't be surprised. SUVs are driving the market in the passenger vehicle category as for the last 2-3 years now. July may have been better, like Suchetana said, but fiscal 2021 is not going to be good. It looks set to be a washout for automobile companies. For a country that has been projected to become the third biggest, we're already the fourth biggest, and by 2021 we are supposed to become the third biggest auto market. The past 15 months have set us back quite a bit.
When we will get back to the high growth levels of pre-2019-20 is anyone's guess. However, COVID might actually spur some positive changes, such as the increasing electrification of vehicles in personal transport, increase of shared mobility, which of course is currently under huge onslaught, sharp rise in sales of pre-owned cars or pre-loved cars, as we call it these days, increasing sales of 2- and 3-wheelers, especially in rural areas and so on. A big move perhaps is being seen in digital adoption in the Indian automotive industry.
In fact, an often asked question has been, how are companies staying focused on consumers, in a socially distanced world? This seems to be not made for each other, right? But COVID has also seen a very decisive move towards electric vehicles, especially small format EVs, in the two-wheelers and three-wheelers, which offer very attractive total cost of ownership compared to even traditional ICE vehicles. And they're ripe for, novel concepts such as battery swapping. From a policy perspective as well, there has been a more concerted push towards EVs. There are many more trends that are underlying and changing the auto landscape, making it a very exciting time to be in this industry and in this discussion today. But before we jump into that, I would like to invite Raghu Gullapalli of Accenture to give his opening remarks. Raghu, over to you.
Thanks, Alokesh. Thanks, Suchetana. So yeah, like you said, I think it's an industry which is at a tipping point. Even without the impact of COVID, the industry was seeing significant challenges with slowing demand, rising inventories, rising spends on R&D, and not to mention some colorful trade wars and exchange of barbs. So pressure has been mounting on OEMs, dealerships, and the supplier community over the last many months. And in this scenario came the whole COVID shock. Demand has slumped in most markets by over 80%. Supply chains have been disrupted, and most stakeholders in the industry across the value chain are faced with significant liquidity pressures. And while demand will come back at some stage, I think the primary focus today for OEMs, dealerships, as well as suppliers is essentially around what we are seeing is three things. One is, of course, focusing on reviving demand. Second, I think building more resilience in their supply chain and operations. And third is really amping up the whole digitization quotient. So there's a big focus around, going digital. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more from our panel on what are some of the focus areas for the industry in general and their organizations in particular. So Alokesh, over to you to get this discussion going, my friend.
Thank you, Raghu, for your remarks and for the insights. We hope to further upon those insight threads that you've spoken about as we go ahead in the discussion. I'll jump right into this panel discussion without wasting any more time. My first question is to Martin. Martin, we've been seeing in the auto industry a very steep decline in sales even before COVID. So perhaps COVID has only accentuated it. So what are the structural issues that need to be addressed?
Well, I would think it's a little undervaluing COVID if you say it accentuated it. Yeah, I think we had a fundamental shock to the system after already 2019, the transition to BS4 and for BS4 to BS6, a lot of interruptions there already. So, but what it has accelerated is certainly should we operate our business in future. And one topic was already mentioned by Raghu, whilst digitization was in the cards, I think, for many companies. And 1 year ago already, we launched our connected vehicles. We started with an e-commerce platform. It really has put another focus on transformation and digitization across the entire value chain. And that is from the production to the sales environment and at the end at the customer usage and benefit. And I think a lot of that has happened and is not finished yet. So I think there is clearly a strong focus on digitization across the entire industry. I said production, but I should actually have said from the supply chain, because we all believe that this is at the end the key, that we have a seamless connectivity across all these different elements in the value chain.
Thanks, and I'll move to Venkat. Venkat, would you agree with Martin in the sense that digitization is, or digitalization as we call it, the move to digital technologies, is it going to make that much of an impact on companies? And what, in your view, are the structural issues that Suchetana was referring to?
See, India being a young country, first of all, and digitalization is part of process of transformation. And we are just in the beginning. I don't think there is any end to the digitalization. But definitely the aspirational customers or the consumer is always trying to link product to product. So I agree with Martin that digitalization is the future for sure, and product being the hero at the center of the whole attraction, whichever is a product. Here we are talking about automotive, so cars are the products, and the digitalization and other features come in and get embedded into the car for the easiness of performance and as well as motivate the customer to do things which are apart from traveling from point A to point B. So yes, I agree with Martin that digitalization is the future, but what level of digitalization is a question, because what we have today is what we have, and the digitalization is continuously organically growing or improving, and where it goes and stops, we don't know. So people are also looking at various innovations like autonomous driving, which is going in future. India is far away from that, but what we have today is we are at the limit of 5G, and we have to reach to that level. And I'm sure every organization is working towards it, and so is Renault. And apart from that, it is not only the product, but it is also the service around the product, whether your customer experience or your dealer interactions or your service network, as well as the production, supply chain, logistics, everything has to get interconnected. And digitalization plays a role to be more efficient in future so that we get the right product at the right time, at the right cost to the consumers.
Thanks, Venkat. I'll take the question to Rajeev. Rajeev, Martin and Venkat both have spoken about digitalization. Venkat has also spoken about how the product is the hero. Now, looking at the current scenario and also the headwinds that that the automotive industry has been facing in the past few years. So, what are the changes that you think what are the structural changes that the industry should look forward to?
So I think Venkat has explained the digitalization thing pretty well. But I think let's look at the bigger question what you're asking, or Alokesh hinted initially. The kind of potential what we have in India towards car penetration or two-wheeler or even four-wheeler penetration, we are nowhere close to our potential. Okay. We have been in the industry. I have been in the industry since last 25, 30 years now here, and I have been sick of making presentations to my bosses from abroad that, hey, India is so big, potential is so huge. We have 400 million middle class, and the kind of purchasing power we are going to have is amazing. Penetration will improve from 20 to maybe 70 or 80 or 100 per thousand, and all those presentations we have made, and we have failed in my opinion, right? And we just sell the potential of the country. We are not able to execute it in the country. That's true. And unfortunately, that goes to fundamental DNA of our country in India, not Indians, by the way, Indians in India, that we talk a lot and our execution is pretty bad. So that's one thing. Then it comes to, so longer term, we can do much more, and we may be happy with 6, 7, 8% growth. We may be happy by saying we are the 4th largest in the world right now. And we may be 3rd largest, maybe in the next 4 or 5 years, we are achieving 5, 6, 7% growth every year. But I think we need to talk about what can we do much better. So there are lots and lots of issues facing the industry in general. There are long-term issues, there are short-term issues. In the shortest term issue, it's a COVID challenge, but we'll come out of it. It's a question of another 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, and we'll be back to kind of new normal in auto industry, and we'll start achieving 6% growth to 8% growth easily. But the longer term issues, you have to think of some basics, some simple basics. If you want, number one, we need to understand the importance of the auto industry to the country. Are we aligned to that or not? And some numbers which we throw always is 7 to 8% of GDP of the country is from auto industry. We generate almost 25 jobs per car sold, right? The kind of forward and backward linkages what we have with the economy is huge. And typically, it's a chicken or egg story. Do we give impetus to economy, or economy gives impetus to auto industry? Both are like, aligned. So I think first we need to get aligned. Is it an important industry for the country or not? Once it is, then let's talk about how do we make it better? And there it is. Can we have one nodal agency for automotive industry? We have so many ministries, nobody knows you have to report to which ministry, sorry. It starts with the reforms on the nodal agency. It needs to start simple thing. Government has to provide more roads, just simple, better roads. Then let's talk about, can we take out old vehicles from the roads and replace them with new vehicles? Why do you do that, by the way? There's an economic cost to that, right? You take out old fuel efficient cars, replace with new fuel efficient cars, or two-wheelers or four-wheelers, less polluting cars with more polluting cars, less safe cars with more safe cars. So there is an economic cost to this whole thing. Can't we incentivize that? We call it scrappage policy. Can't we incentivize that? So there are lots of things. We talk about GST cut. And by the way, there are lots of issues within our industry also. We are not the saints. Within our industry, we don't have a common viewpoint, right? We are not aligned. We have vested interests. We talk different languages, and once we say GST cut, it's kind of hit wicket in the hit wicket, because when we are saying GST cut, it means consumers are not going to buy and they're going to wait. So in short, I would say there are lots of things. It starts with reforms in the ministry or the governance from the government side, the road side, the financing side, and then scrappage policy, and give a clear outlook on the cleaner technology for the country. What do we want to do for the country for the cleaner environment?
Fantastic. Actually, it's very good to hear such candid views. I'll come to Dipti on that. And basically, Dipti, the issues that Rajeev has highlighted, I'd also like you to give your views on that, because these are really certain basic issues that are there. Why is it that he is continued to make presentations, for so long and failed to make much of an impact, despite now, of course, he's hugely successful. I'm sure that if he makes a presentation now, people are going to listen more. Not that they didn't listen to you before, but success breeds a bit of a thing. But Deepti, you can tell us a little bit about benefits of a scrappage policy, because scrappage policy has been used in Europe, in the UK and other parts, and it has been successful. So where are we lacking, and is the auto industry getting its due? Where are the structural issues?
So, according to me, look, there is a lot that the government has to step in to really make sure that we can lift this industry and get it back on the growth pedal. So, which is including the way the scrappage policy is, or the way the BS4 norms are getting implemented. Because if you see, it's been one after the other, but there is no clear direction on how the execution and the implementation will really actually play out. And what is it that the OEMs and the industry should be planning for? So I think one is the aspect of, from a long-term perspective, what are the fundamental changes that the government and the policy should be looking at? Yes, it will take some time, but I'm sure that will come. But to me, I think if I look at it from an industry perspective, just to go back to Alokesh, what you were talking about, I also see that there could be fundamental operating model changes that could be adopted from a consumer sentiment perspective. What Rajeev pointed out towards is that there is a huge market of used cars from a scrappage policy, but are we saying that in this entire environment we will see used cars as a lift? Or are we saying that the ownership models itself are going to change? And as an operating level, we need to start looking at how do we innovate? The fundamental question that we need to ask ourselves is ownership of a car going to be the norm that we all are going to live by, or that itself as an operating model from what we want to drive from a growth perspective is going to change? So Alokesh, the point that I'm trying to make is, yes, there is a dimension of what the government and the the industry as a whole can do better, but that we all understand without making too much of a commentary takes its own time. But as industry leaders and as people who are driving this industry from a consumer perspective, these are the fundamental operating changes that also should be adopted to make sure that we can give the growth pedal a bit of a spike.
Just go to Suchetana, but the fact that even in this dim market, there are those instances of huge success, like MG Motor and like Renault have proven. They prove that there is potential, as to what Rajeev is saying. There's certainly a deep potential in that. Yeah, Suchetana, sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. Dipti, you spoke about what the industry should do and what the government should do. I'll come to Ashwath with that question. Ashwath, as Alokesh is pointing out, and as we've mentioned, there are bright spots, so there is potential. Do you think that this potential can be given a fillip if there is policy intervention, and if non-facilitating policies of the past, such as GST, can be taken care of?
Certainly that can help. This industry has always been self-reliant, which means they've always believed that as long as the government gives a little bit of a push and then stays out of the way, we don't really need too much to help grow this industry. And I think what is required though is clarity, which means there needs to be clarity in the policy. There needs to be clarity of infrastructure, which means when will infrastructure come in, how much investment will happen to infrastructure, you cannot have a stable environment when the rules of the games keep changing. So, for example, we want to move to alternate fuels, but for alternate fuels, the roadmap is not clear. What does the government intend for the fuel roadmap to be for the next 10 years? Industry has given its view, but is the government aligned with that view? And what are we doing to bring clarity to those kinds of views? So certainly, government policy needs to be clear. You cannot give people every single option available and then expect people to make investments. So to elaborate a point, you cannot have a fuel strategy which says I will use methane, I will use LNG, I will use CNG, I will use biofuel, and I will use three other substances. Now you industry, you invest and
Decide for yourself.
decide for
Yeah,
yourself.
invest in everything.
Yeah.
Exactly. So those kinds of lack of clarity and in the roadmaps leads people to confusion, and people will do what is best for their own industry. So that's why you see some pockets of brilliance where there are companies who understand the needs of certain market segments, certain niches, certain needs which are inherent. Felt by the customers, and so they target those and they are able to do well. But if you want the entire industry to boom and do better, and as many of the leaders here have elaborated, the automotive industry is heading towards this acronym which we call CASE, which stands for connected, autonomous, the subscription, the Uberization of the world, and electrification. So those four mega trends are in play. But for to implement those trends, massive investments need to be made, and which means that for people to make those investments, there needs to be clarity in policy. There needs to be ways by which you can't have old clunkers from BS1 and BS2 running on the road and causing 85% of the pollution, and then we come up with BS6, and who's going to keep buying more expensive cleaner air products when older cheaper products are still running on the road.
So Ashwath, on just before I come to Vijay, I will also want to ask you, because you are also a very strong player in the commercial vehicle space, right? You supply to all the most of the major OEMs there. Tell us a little bit about what structural issues you see in the commercial vehicle industry, because the dynamics are very different from the PV segment.
I think Martin expressed those pretty clearly. So we started off with the reason 2019 was such a bad year, and we saw nearly a 40% drop from 2018, which was a record year. Well, first started off with the financial crisis where the NBFCs went into a crisis, and so pretty much the trucking industry, which consists of small individual owners who own between 1 and 5 trucks. 65% of the industry is made up of such owners.
Right.
Stop funding them. And so pretty much if they don't get financing, they stop buying stuff. Second is they introduced a regulation where they legitimized overloading of vehicles, which means this has never happened anywhere else in any part of the world, where retroactively all vehicles which are already plying on the road were allowed to have up to 20% greater load carrying capacity, which has taken the entire industry's carrying capacity and automatically just bumped it up by 20% with no structural change in the vehicle or any safety norms, etc. So you pretty much took away a year's worth of demand or little more than that just with these kinds of rules. That was followed by the transition from BS4 to BS6. This is a record for this industry. Typically, when other parts of the world went from this level of BS4 level technology to BS6 level technology, it took a period anywhere between 7 to 10 years. And in India, that was done in 2.5 to 3 years. And
Right.
so it had a cost, it had a complexity to it. So combination of all of these factors, and then to top it all, we have been hit by COVID, which is a mega pandemic. So, you add all of those together and you see an industry which is down in demand by 70 to 80%. And
Yeah.
yeah, those are the
Yeah,
fundamentals.
it's quite bad actually. I'll come
Solve
to
those
Vijay.
problems.
Vijay, from the battery maker's perspective, you make both automobile as well as industrial batteries, right? So there are two different businesses, if I'm not mistaken. Now, the battery business is hugely dependent on the sales of cars and trucks and everything, right? And you also have a vantage position in that sense of understanding what the issues are in this industry. Even pre-COVID, like we have been discussing, that there are structural issues, like some of them Rajiv has pointed out, the others we have been discussing. From your viewpoint, what do you see as the major challenges? What are the issues that really need to be addressed?
Yeah, I want to pick up from where Rajiv said about the potential versus execution. I know this per capita metric that we typically measure in terms of industry potential has always shown a significant attractiveness in the automotive sector. And again, we keep comparing ourselves as to what was China's journey versus what's the potential India holds. And even today, when you compare those numbers, you look at the vehicle penetration at various levels, there is a huge gap there. But I think this per capita metrics are becoming less and less relevant as we go forward. If China has a per capita of X and we are at 0.1X today, I don't think we would really move in the direction of moving to X as a metric. There could be probably other business models that will probably drive the behavior of consumers, drive the behavior of vehicle ownership, where even a 0.5X probably will deliver what this country needs. That's one aspect of it that we need to look at. But why haven't we moved to 0.5X from 0.1X? Why is it taking so long for us to exploit the potential that the market has in terms of translating that into execution? Alokesh, the other aspect I look at is what's the kind of transportation challenge that we have in the country and how are we really meeting it? I want to put that into three buckets. One of the largest challenge for us is about urban commute. The vehicle ownership is largely around urban consumers and the utilization is for commute. The government has stepped in and tried to put a lot of metro projects to have mass transportation or mass commute models being built in. But still, we are, by the time a project is conceived and launched, the demand would have actually far exceeded before the project is actually realized. So we are again doing all this catch-up game all the time. And now with COVID and physical distancing issues coming in, whether the mass transportation infrastructure that's built in by the government, heavily subsidized by the government, will be the right model going forward need to be seen. I know we talked about 6 months as a time frame where probably some of the day-to-day issues with COVID could be resolved. But what about the long-term behavioral changes that would be driving the trends in the market? So the commute riddle as imposed by COVID is another major issue that we need to look at it. And then, Ashwath talked about CASE, the connected, autonomous, shared and electric. I think it's very important for the industry structurally to look at what is the long-term goal that we are looking at. Be very focused about investing into those long-term solutions rather than having knee-jerk responses to, in an aspiration to do everything on the canvas. So we need to be more directed towards that. From a battery perspective, we know this is a significant transformation that's on the move right now. And domestic competency and the capability to provide electric powertrain solutions, in our perspective as a battery manufacturer, is an extremely important agenda for us on the cards.
Right. Vijay, I'll take the question now to Raghu. Raghu, Vijay raised a very important point. He's asking, why is it taking India time to exploit the latent demand that is there in the country? Do you have an answer to that?
I think, Rajiv put the question and answered it to a large extent. I think we talk about potential, but execution has always been an issue. And Dipti also talked about it briefly. While there are, macro issues around policy, around regulation, but there is a fair bit within the constraints and within the limitations that the macro environment has. I think there's a fair bit that can be done at a firm level or at an industry level. And if I look at the industry today, what are the strategic imperatives? let me respond in two parts. Let's talk about what OEMs can and, are doing, and what are suppliers, the tier one suppliers like Cummins, like Amara Raja, what are they, looking at, and what do we see as trends that can be borrowed from outside of India, and what are things that we can look at. So firstly, on the OEMs, I think there are really, we see three strategic responses. First, like some of the panelists talked about, there is a need to look at the next generation growth model in some sense. So players are looking at deepening their presence in market spaces which are relatively underpenetrated today. So tier 2, 3 towns, and in some cases, in some segments, also looking at rural markets. So people are looking at, growing into these underpenetrated spaces. And associated with this growth model is also the question of what is the role of the future dealer, and how that's going to change. What is the shape and form of the direct to consumer proposition that the automotive industry will take? How is that likely to evolve? So that's one big focus area for OEMs. Second, I think there is a need, and we talked about it briefly, there is a need to aggressively look at leveraging digital, especially in the front end space for automotive players. Looking at, whether it's looking at analytics to understand, segment and target customers better, or raising, let's say, engagement quotient when consumers or customers visit dealerships, looking at tools like car configurators, driving simulators, and so on. Or even looking at, making after sales far more convenient and easy through simple to use apps. So there are a whole range of things that we see happening in the industry in India and elsewhere. So how do we really amp this up in terms of, the whole digitization quotient? The third bit and the third area, again, we talked about it briefly, a priority for OEMs is really looking at new products and services. Whether it's figuring out their play in the, let's say, the electric vehicle space, just to take an example, or looking at their play in the mobility services space, the whole car ownership question and shared mobility question. So what's the position that each of the individual players will take in the mobility services space? Or even looking at digital services, leveraging the vehicle ecosystem as a platform, the data that's coming out to, create new services. And partnerships here we've seen play a key role, whether it's OEMs working with suppliers or even technology players. No one player has the capability to do everything on their own. So partnerships have to play a key role. So again, a lot of these are things that industry and firm level initiatives need to drive. The macroeconomy and the policy and regulation is what it is. It'll evolve. So that was on the OEM side. If I look at the suppliers, again, broadly you can classify the responses into three areas. First, the whole squeeze, the mega trends that we talked about, the case mega trends. It's going to put a huge pressure on the automotive industry, and a lot of that pressure is going to flow down to the suppliers. So given the squeeze in margins and profits that suppliers are going to see, what we see is a lot of aggressive actions around driving costs down in the core supply chain and manufacturing areas, using digital technologies to further, bring in more efficiencies in the core middle office area, as we call it, supply chain and manufacturing. Second, big thing we are seeing on the supplier side is that a lot of the tier one suppliers have fairly well spread out footprints, regional and global footprints. And a lot of this footprint has grown through inorganic acquisitions. And with the squeeze on margins, we see a lot of the suppliers relooking at their operating models to drive down costs. Whether it's looking at shared services or global business services. Again, the idea is to leverage low-cost locations, leverage digital technologies to drive costs down in the back office area. So that's the second big thing we see suppliers doing. And the third big area is the whole product or component itself. For the longest periods of time, automotive components were all largely, I would say largely, not completely, mechanical or electrical parts. And there's a lot more digital coming into automotive components. So the whole play that suppliers will have in the component space is going to be differentiated by how they mix or bring in blend digital into their core component growth plans. And how do you leverage that? So those are the three, big things I would say on the supplier side. So that's what I would say, from the OEMs and for suppliers, those are really the strategic imperatives.
Thanks, Raghu. In fact, quite a lot of inputs and very interesting inputs. In fact, I'll come to Martin with the next question, and part of it is spurred by Raghu's mention of direct to consumer. It reminds me of the DTH days when the cable guys were bypassed, and the satellite transmission came in, and television came direct to your home instead of coming through the cable operator. So, Martin, direct to consumer is something most OEMs are already starting to do in some way through the portals and all. But the larger question is, we have been struggling with this growth in this industry for about 15 months now, and there are fundamental issues like we have already discussed. This growth sputter in the growth is likely to continue, at least from what we have read in surveys and spoken to people, likely to continue till at least June 2021, and only after that maybe certain things and all will start to improve. But it also depends partly on how long the virus stays around us, right? So what is your sense of what are the demand drivers that will drive growth? And for a premium and luxury product like yours, my sense is that it should not, unfortunately, I don't get to see your numbers in SIAM because you don't submit them. But, maybe you can tell us about, how growth has hit you and what are the demand drivers for you in the future? Are the wealthy still buying your cars? Because they don't really care about, do they really care about COVID? Are they hit?
Let me start with your first question first quickly. Yeah, I think quite frankly, direct to consumers and direct to customers is definitely a possibility. If you interpret that as being where the customer is, we need to be where the customers are. And that means digitally and physically. And I would want to point out on that this is even these times even more important, that we are providing for the customer contact points with us that are as possible as possible strongly in a seamless way. And that is for me the direct link to the customer, and the role of the dealer, I would want to point out, is not changing in our view. The dealer will be the facilitator between the customer and the OEM. And that is in a way between online and offline at the same time. If you want to be seamless between online and offline, you have to have the dealer in a strong position and be the point of contact. If it's an online buy, a purchase, for example, we have something what we call assisted buy. Then the customer can really get help of someone, an online concierge from the dealership to work through the digital purchasing experience. So there's a lot of integration that needs to happen, and that will happen continuously going forward. In my view, the dealers are there to stay, but they have to change and adopt their role also in a way to embrace that seamless journey from digital to online and offline experience there for the customers. If ask how is that working right now and how are we doing in the business? Quite frankly, I mean, whilst the second quarter this year was completely, I would say, a washout, now we see gradually the business coming back. And you're right, I would not think our customers don't have the money anymore, but there is still some pent-up demand which is not happening into purchase at the moment. What we see month over month, we see quite significant increases. We see the sentiment is coming back to some extent. I personally always said we need freedom of movement also for our customers. I mean, even if you have the money, but if you sit home, how do you create the desire? And as funny as it sounds, my view is even you have to have international travel, you have to have intrastate, interstate, every type of movement that creates a dynamic and also positive attitude again, which I believe will gradually build up. And we are still hopeful that we see a positive trend also towards the festive season, that people also want to get over with it to some extent, even though it will not be over. And we see even the government is acting like this. I mean, our case numbers are not drastically reducing, but we go from unlock 1 to 3 to 4 because we need to get over with it. And that's I would say, human wish that is following here. And I believe we will see the demand coming back, and also helped by what was mentioned already here. Product is the strongest part which you can bring here into play. We have beautiful new products launched without advertising now, but I mean the GLS, for example, has attracted so much traction with customers. So products will help, accessibility will help, transparency in the purchase process will help, being where the customers are will help. And so I'm saying our goods anyways are not, you don't need the car, you want it, and the want is not going away. The want for all of us is not going away. And so I'm building really on a comeback here, and looking forward. It will take a few more months, that's for sure, but I see the wanting will prevail, and that is it's for all of us here on that panel. We not have to stop to want, yeah. I mean, and we will execute at some point in time.
Right, Martin. I'll take the question to Venkatram. Martin is talking about demand trickling in, but what are the demand drivers, Venkat, in a world where mobility is so restricted?
First of all, this coronavirus, we don't know how long it will stay. So there is a situation what we are in today, and we had a situation even before, whether it is BS4, BS6 or GST or many other the eventual stuff. But what is more important is how to create need in the marketplace where the demand starts propagating itself. And what we see in Renault is that rural market is picking up very, very quickly, maybe because of various issues of coronavirus or some earning power going back into the rural market and so on and so forth. We have seen 25% of our revenue coming out of rural market, and we see it growing month over month. And if you have seen that the growth rate at which we are today is moving much faster, thanks to a product called Triber, which is giving a lot of success to us. And we continue to work in the products of that innovation like Triber and so on and so forth. And we have furthermore products coming into the same platforms. Having said that, what is more important today is to meet the customer demands and the needs as well as the marketplace. You got to innovate your marketplace. And that's what we are trying to do over the last 2-3 years. That's how we have penetrated into the rural market. And we call ourselves Project Vista, where we are expanding our network base into the rural side of the business. And it is definitely giving us results. We should not shy away saying that urban versus rural are different. They are saying the only requirement is how well we cater our services to the rural customers too. And we are trying to balance both the rural as well as the urban customers as much as possible through various innovative solutions, whether it is physical or digital or any other means. So we are trying to do that. So meanwhile, as Rajeev Chaba was talking about, the most important thing is ecosystem. I mean, every automotive industry have their products, have their innovation, bring their own features, bring their own technology and so on and so forth, which is very individualistic by manufacturer or by OEMs. But there is an ecosystem which government has to support. And that's where we all have to emphasize. And I'm sure that there will be some level of support coming out of the industry itself to the government as a suggestion or recommendations, which government has to listen and start putting up this ecosystem, whether it is for ICE engines, internal combustion engines, or for the EV cars moving forward. India is very nascent or very baby, we are putting baby steps on the EV side today. But we will not take so long time as that of Europe or China on the EV. I'm very sure about it because our propagation was so fast, like BS4 to BS6. We had been complaining and cribbing about it, but we are doing leapfrogging. And I'm sure India will see leapfrogging moving forward. Yes, along with Rajeev Chaba, I also did a lot of presentations and fallen flat many times, but there is a progress, and the progress is much faster than many other countries in Europe. And I'm very confident and positive enough that the growth rate would be similarly faster moving forward too. We have to look up for the government, no doubts. We need their support. We need their system in place. We need the policies which will build the ecosystem as well as our future. But there is enough work to be done by the OEMs as well. But as we move ahead, progress from internal combustion to EV, there's a lot of threat on supplier base that from 2,400 part numbers on an ICE car will go down to 1/3 once you move into a electric car. Yeah, the number of parts, moving parts, as well as the parts you assemble will drastically go down, and cost goes up. And we also have to see how do we balance this whole equation of employment, as we call, when you move from one technology to the other. It's not that because in way back in 2000 when Y2K was there, people were saying that computers will come and people will lose job. Actually, it multiplied and multiplied and multiplied. So there are new job creations which will happen. Similarly, in automotive industry, there will be new technologies coming in and job migration will happen. And we all have to understand and start looking in future more prospectively, and also talk to the government and make sure the government also makes future steps to make sure that we have a balanced ecosystem moving forward. So this is how we are looking at. Rural is the current market situation, and we should work all together there to make sure that we balance both rural and urban markets together.
Maybe Alokesh and Suchetana might be useful to get a quick sense from our panelists on on this question of driving demand, how they are actually leveraging digital, in the whole creating the demand and servicing the demand. Maybe a quick round in terms of what are each of them doing. That might be
that's a good point. In fact, we'll come to that because digital is a huge part of driving demand. And to Venkat's points also, the fact is that as human beings, we are averse to change, I think, and that is why all these things keep happening. When the change in technologies, when the computers came, and now when the EVs are going to come, we are just not too sure whether the change is going to be for the good or not in the long term. But hopefully things will work out. And if there is one company that has no worries about demand at this point, apart from Renault, it's MG Motor, right? The demand is shooting through the roof. I think you're finding it hard to actually meet the current demand, and there's a queue, isn't it, Rajeev?
Yeah, so far so good. Still we are lucky as our honeymoon period continues, hopefully.
Yeah, so it reminds me of an opening test batsman who would come and score a century on debut, and uske baad kya hua, that is the important part. So now the question is, how do you keep the demand going?
Yeah, so Alokesh, I would say let's start with the basic human emotions at this point of time, like worldwide, and let's say in India, when we are all faced with the COVID. Why would anyone buy a car at this point of time? Right? Let's think about it simply. And all of us as individuals, why would you buy a car at this point of time? Right? So it starts with that something you had sold your car maybe just before this COVID, and now you are desperate to buy a car because you don't have a car. Second, you are going to office your kids have started getting to office sometime, and now they don't want to go into Uber and Ola, so you want to buy a car for them. That's the one. Or there is some ceremony happening or some big occasion happening in the family, and you want to buy a car. Or there are some kinds of guys like like YOLO kind of guys that you only live once. God knows what happens tomorrow, so let me splurge, and revenge buying kind of thing, and you want to buy cars. Okay, so those are the human emotions at this point of time. So whatever is happening right now, and by the way, industry is doing well, let me say it, in the sense that July we came to almost as good as last year. August, I'm telling you, we would be around 5 to 10% more than last year. Okay, wholesale. Now this again, industry, it's a different animal in the industry. Wholesale, which the stock which you are selling to the dealers, not really retail, but retail also is not that bad. Now this is latent demand because of the factors I just told you. People are buying the car. Is it sustainable? Answer is no. But what would happen is in the next 2-3 months, because of festivities coming and all, you will start feeling better. COVID virus, we may or may not get a solution. Being Indians will say, Jo hai, so hai, and let's live with it. Let's take precautions. Let's do everything, but let's start moving out of home because we're getting sick of being locked down. Okay, so you will accept that reality. Festivities are coming. You will try to cheer up, and festivities also will increase your mood, and you will start buying cars. Let's say January, February comes. What happens then? Now, problem is there. Okay, now problem is there because if you do not have demand stimulation, now then you cannot do it. Now, who does this? Government does it. OEMs do it. Dealers do it. How do we do it? Now, government has to give stimulant at that point of time to the economy in general. Okay. Now, I don't want to go into any specific solution for the automotive industry, but I think there are lots of levers which government can do so that the economy improves, the feel factor improves, hopefully uncertainty around COVID starts fading away, and people start coming back to the showrooms or start searching the car digitally, which is what Raghu and Dipti would like to hear. That's true, by the way. That's true.
I take that.
Right.
Yeah.
The second thing is OEMs. Now we have to keep the interest on. So product innovations, product launches, brand extensions, and then sales promotions, like, limited editions and all those things will create the demand. And sometimes, those special limited editions for a special time, you create sense of urgency in consumer, they come and buy. We as a company, as a strategy, and I want to use this opportunity to say that we want it to be differentiated, and we say, hey guys, how do we do it? See, I'm very proud to say this thing, thanks to my team. Hector, we have launched 1 year back. We haven't given a single rupee discount so far, and we are on a wait list. That's a fact. But we said we want to be differentiated, so it was a connected car. Then, and lots of guys say, you're 2G, 3G you have in India, and then you want 4G connection, so why would you? That's a separate topic, and if there's an opportunity, I'll talk about that. Second, we said the EV. By the way, as we speak, every month we are getting 130 to 150 orders, and our EV is 22 lakhs to 25 lakhs of rupees. Okay, so 120 to 150 people, we already delivered 600 cars. Last whole year, EV four-wheeler sale was less than 1,000. And we have sold 600 cars already, COVID, no COVID.
Of that price point.
The third car, what we are going to launch in the next few weeks, we are going to do autonomous level 1 car in a premium SUV. So connected EV and autonomous level 1, this is our play, and we want to be differentiated. Consumers want something new, something different. They want global technologies at the right price point in the country. And that's how you create the demand.
Thanks, Rajiv, for those insights. I'll take the same question to Ashwath. Rajiv is talking about government intervention to improve sentiment because he's looking beyond the festive season. Ashwath, two questions to you. First, I'll take Raghu's point that he was making to you. Do you think digital adoption has been, of course, digital adoption has been fast-tracked by COVID. Do you see it as a demand driver?
Yeah, I think the products we make are more are used more heavily in what we call working machines, and these are products which are typically used. They work 24/7, and they are used to transport goods or generate power or used as working applications. And so the customers in those segments, they value most is the durability and the innovation that we bring in terms of fuel economy or features by which they can improve their livelihood, which means they can run longer hours or they can work harder. Those are the kinds of things. And certainly with the movement to cleaner air, and India has signed up to the Paris Accord, and so there is a game plan, and to meet those levels of clean air, we automatically have to go to much tighter tolerances as far as emissions are concerned, and that requires moving everything to electronic and digital platforms. And the way we are thinking about it is how can we use these working machines to make it more productive for employees. So solutions such as connected solutions, telematics, giving the user more information in their hands so that they can improve their productivity is the way we are thinking about it, and adding those kinds of features into the product. And so certainly it will help, but we have to demonstrate the value. Our customers don't buy into the sexy aspect of the technology. You got to really show it to them, and that's why even in this COVID period, while we do a lot of video, live coaching, training, etc., we also have people in the last mile out in the field actually demonstrating some of these digital tools, technologies, etc., to end users to show them how they can generate value.
Ashwath, my second question to you is that once the Alokesh, I'll take one question.
Go ahead.
That is, once the effects of the pandemic recedes, do you see demand coming back in a major way, and will that be pushed through rural demand? Do you see that as a big wave?
Certainly, rural demand drives our economy. Is still a very agrarian kind of economy, and so certainly a very large percentage of our population, lives rurally, works rurally. And so our GDP cannot grow significantly if the rural demand doesn't pick up. And the kinds of industry we are in is very highly correlated to the way the GDP keeps growing, infrastructure spending keeps happening. I'm very optimistic. We have, like some of the others here, our company has been in existence for over 100 years, and we have seen many cycles of ups and downs. And every time you have a very deep down cycle, the bounce back when you get it is even stronger. And because we have access to great technology, great products, great investments have already been made in this country by us, I'm really optimistic that things will bounce back. The timing, of course, could vary a little bit based on so many factors, but when it comes back, it will come back very strong.
Right. Thanks for that, Ashwath. In fact, I'll go to Vijay now. Vijay, basically, two questions again for you. One is the same question that went to Ashwath on the digital. And do you think better automation of processes and more digital in your systems and in your products, is that going to necessarily result in a higher growth curve for you? And the second question is, all this talk of EV is basically electric vehicle is hugely dependent on the battery, right? The battery is the core. The battery is the car, more or less, in an EV. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit about the technological developments that are taking place in the battery field, with lithium ion, and you're also part of the alliance, right? The global alliance. So if you could tell us a little bit about both these aspects, what are the technologies? Because if all these car makers are going to be bullish on EVs, they're going to need batteries. And what are the developments they should look forward to?
Yeah, the first question that you asked about how digitalization is impacting and how we would adopt. We all know that COVID has been single largest factor of accelerated digitalization of various aspects of the business. Batteries in general tend to be not very intelligent the way they are built in the previous application sectors. But there is increasing need for us to integrate batteries into the ecosystem around us, digitally connect them, and have remote data access. For example, today we run few thousands of telecom towers where we access the performance of the battery and the energy situation in the terminals from a remote way. And there are business models from product selling to energy selling transformations has already happened there, because I have the ability to look at the digitally monitoring what's happening on the energy situation in the tower. So now instead of selling a battery, we are actually selling energy there to the telecom towers. Now, the business processes that we follow earlier, as we were having an informal conversation, Sudha talked about battery availability during the pandemic situation, and our ability to make the product available where it is required is again based on certain digital processes that we have put in place, where channels have been empowered to map the demand digitally and ensure that the product is available at the right place. So while there is a brick and mortar channel that works on the ground, they are being empowered with the digital connectivity to be able to see how do I connect with the consumer, understand consumer needs, and make the product available when they want. Incidentally, battery purchase is a distress purchase, like medicine. You can't wait once you need a battery. And at that point of time, you need to make sure the product is available to the consumer. So definitely digitalization is hugely positively impactful on the battery industry. Data centers, healthcare services, telecom networks, there is a much higher need for reliability of power availability now. So we see that actually the demand, even during the pandemic situation, this became part of essential services for us. Thankfully, government allowed essential services to run uninterruptedly during that period of time. So we had some part of our operations working overtime to meet those requirements. In terms of the second part of the question that you talked about, the EV adoption and acceleration, we firmly believe that what India needs is India-specific solutions. A Tesla success cannot be replicated in India. Many of the successes that China could drive are not necessarily replicable in Indian context. The study says 75% of the problem in solving the transportation issues in India are urban centric, whether it is environmental issues, whether it is vehicle application, whether it is energy requirements. Now, if you have a solution to address that part of it, you would have probably reaped the low-hanging fruits in that. So in the next 3 to 5 year period, I think the focus would be more about how do you adapt electrical mobility for bottom of the pyramid curve. While there will be these exotic vehicles, Rajiv talked about the MGM vehicle being offered, there are always those niche customers who want to try what feels good for them. But the quantum and impact can be made only when you are addressing that portion of the problem, which is at the bottom of the pyramid. So two-wheelers and three-wheelers, people transportation and goods transportation will get a lot of attention. And fortunately, the technology complexity at that level is relatively simple. So India doesn't have to go through a major breakthrough kind of a thing. TCO is already achieved in certain use case applications there. And battery swapping is something more easy done there than in a more advanced vehicle. So I'm seeing a lot of bright spots on the EV adoption at that level. And fortunately, that's always the bigger part of what we want to solve as mobility challenges. So I'm pretty hopeful, and that's what our focus right now. So I go back to what was discussed earlier as case. I think we need to look at very focusedly, when we look at electric powertrains, prioritize what you are trying to target at, ensure that you deliver solutions that fit the market and scale it up. That will create an environment for you to start expanding it to other aspects of the electric mobility solutions in the country.
I'd like to come in here. I think I've attended a few other webinars, and I think something that is very starkly changed during this COVID period is that supply chain discussions have become completely boardroom discussions, which I'm sure in the auto industry they always were, because supply chain is very, very critical for you. But for several other industries also, there's something which was taken for granted has become a very critical discussion in boardrooms. So digitization, I'm sure, is going to help that aspect of planning a lot more. I think, Raghu and Dipti going forth. I'd like to just focus on a couple of points. See what Vijay is talking about and where OEMs are really talking about, what OEMs are really talking about. India, there are some strategic directions that India as a country needs to take as far as mobility is concerned. Whether it is government-led mass mobility, whether it's shared mobility, whether it's personal mobility. Now, I mean, how are we as an industry going to really sit with the government and charter a path for India, keeping in mind the entire ecosystem, the way Vijay is talking, rather than only talk about our perspectives from, the three layers that really affect this country a lot. Because if this industry is seen as working towards the long-term growth of mobility in a sustained manner, in a sustainable manner for the country, then I think the government is going to be far more open to all the suggestions that all of you come together and give. I just want to understand, how can we facilitate this process together? Is it even possible to do that, or is it too much to bite?
Yeah. So can I take on that, Sudha, to start with? Yeah. So the thing is, I hope your point is well taken, and I think your intent is pretty noble, and this is what we would like to imagine we should do. But maybe sometimes oversimplification. So what I'm trying to say here is that we all players, let's say from OEM, and again OEM also is pretty diversified. You have two-wheelers, four-wheelers, three-wheelers, and commercial vehicles. So so within that, again, you need to probably talk about four-wheelers as one segment. But anyway, because our group is diverse today, so let me try to focus on industry per se, including two-wheeler and commercial vehicle. So here everybody has some kind of, what should I say, political right word is, priorities based on their company strengths or global companies' expertise in certain areas, and that becomes agenda, right? And so you have, so as an example, in terms of technology, you can be great in CNG, You can be great in electric, you can be great in fuel cell. Fuel cell is still commercialized, so slightly far off. Hybrid as an example, and within hybrid, you have mild hybrids and strong hybrids and charging PHEVs and all that stuff, right? So it depends on company's expertise, and that company's expertise depends on whichever the country come from, that country had that policy, right? Based on that, they became expert. Now, when it comes to India, we all represent different countries or different, technologies and things like that. So that's why when we talk to the government, Indian government's job is to find the best solution for India. So as Vijay has been saying, and I think, and by the way, OEMs will respect it at the end of the day. It may not be your company's specific solution, but if the government takes a decision, hey man, X, Y, Z is my future for next 15, 20 years. So I'm going to incentivize, localize all this, make in India on this technology for the next 15 to 20 years. You don't second guess government policy every 2 years. You don't second guess government in every budget. What's going to happen, right? So once that rule is very clear, I think all players, domestic or global, will play this. Now, what Ashwath was saying, as an example, you get so conflicting signals sometimes that CNG is the way to go, okay? Sometimes they say like methanol is the way to go, and then you say, by the way, electric is the way to go anyway, and some players say, no, we want hybrid. The government has got a policy, but for once for all, can we have a long-term solution for next 15, 20 years? That's one thing. So here, I know industry has a role to play. We all have a role to play, but finally government has to take a decision. And government, by the way, has given a clarity on EV. To be fair to the government, they have given, because they have reduced the GST, it's 5%. So that's a very clear thing. On 4-meter cars, they have given the clarity. That less than 4-meter car attracts lower GST. So these are two good examples. But I hope we get the point that this is what industry and the government have to agree in the next few months or 1 year, so that right from Mercedes to MG to TVS to Bajaj to Ashok Leyland, everyone gets a clarity on the road path for the next 15 years.
I mean, as much as I really concur what Rajeev is saying, I would also want to point out that saying a solution for India does not necessarily mean you have to build barriers. It has to be based on something which at the end is a stability of policies. We heard that earlier from Venkat, for example. It has to be based on a roadmap there, but also on harmonization of standards and of openness. Yeah, if we're not understanding that openness is a requirement and it's a bilateral situation with every, and that includes trade and duty situations and so forth, then we will not really ignite. So if I hear a solution for India, I'm completely fine with that. I completely understand the need, because on the ground, the world is very different in India than in any other country. And I have lived in many countries. But I would not want us to forget that at the end, the engine is not just now to dig in and to do India, India, India. It is about creating a framework which allows the Indian companies to prosper based on mid and long-term roadmaps, but at the same time on a spirit of openness, which at least for us as a global company as well is, I think, a need. And I think that will be the engine also for India. So standardization, harmonization, and stability on policies will definitely be suitable engines in my view.
So Martin, what you said is complementary to what I was saying. It's not really two different things. In fact, you have expanded on that it has to be a standardized solution, because we can't have only India specific, because ultimately from India, we also want to export, right? So when you want to export, it has to conform to the global standards and global specifications.
Right. Both Rajeev and Martin, I'll take pointers from you. You pointed out how there should be perhaps a vision document, a 20-year vision document, and all the budgets should work towards reaching that vision, perhaps, where we've seen some sort of derailment from time to time. I'll come to Venkat with that question. When it comes to EVs, despite the Paris Accord, there has been directional problems as far as government policy is concerned. So now that there has been a more concerted push towards it, do you think there's demand in the market for EVs? Do you think it's the right product that needs to be launched and they'll all sell like hotcakes, like the way MG has been selling their EVs?
First of all, we have Niti Aayog, who is framing up the whole EV policies, whether it is FAME 1, FAME 2, and then further development on the EV segment. As I started off saying, today EV is very nascent in India, basically because of ecosystem availability. And whether it is two-wheeler, three-wheeler, or mass commute system where it has to be electrified, as Vijay said, I agree with that logic. But we also have to see that when we get into the rural market, or if we are expanding into the rural side, how much electricity is available. So the basic ecosystem of generating enough electricity to sustain, if all automotive industry gets into EV, then do we have enough power? So it starts back to that story, and then how qualitatively you are generating this electricity in the country. Whether are you using a nuclear reactor or a thermal station or hydro stations, you got to see how much pollution which that is creating. In order to save one city, you are going to spoil half the country because the electric generation is so large. And that's the starting point. And I would believe that yes, EV will take off in India, not at the pace at which we are all dreaming of. In next 5 years, we will sell about 500,000 to 1 million cars. I doubt that. I think it would take at least 10 years because it has to evolve in complete holistic ecosystem. It is not just automotive and the battery companies developing the technology and putting it on the four wheels to drive a car, but it has many other things, the way it has to develop, the acceptance, the cost, as well as the infrastructure needed when they're traveling from point A to point B. And the way today a ICE engine car travels from, say, Chennai to Delhi, will you be able to travel the similar way on the EV? So if we have found those answers, probably you will see a jump in sales. But it is not going to happen in next 1 decade for sure. My belief system says it will take 10 years to come to that level of understanding and market grabbing up the product line. It's not only, it doesn't stop there. It is also stopping on the cost which a customer will put money on EV car to save ecology. So that is more important. If you get a car at 3.5, 5 lakhs to starting car, and the same car, if you go for EV, is going to cost you 10, then customer will think twice, where do he invest? And instead of incentivizing, subsidizing, if it is going into the penalizing type of governance, then probably the speed at which the adoption will take place may increase faster, my opinion. And subsidy and incentives cannot be long-term solutions for any business. It has to be naturally business oriented and should be a profitable business running for any OEMs, no matter which country they belong to or which nation they belong to. So this is how the whole market would, what I would see, that first of all, it starts with the government, how they generate electricity, how much they generate electricity, how well they generate electricity, and what is the ecosystem. Can a car travel from Chennai to Delhi easily the way it is traveling? At what is the acquisition cost? What is the cost of ownership? And so on and so forth. So in my best guess, probably we will see a good traction or pickup of market only somewhere in 2030 onwards.
Right. Thanks, Venkat, for that. In fact, MG Motor is already seeing that traction in 2020. So the rest of the market has to wait, but you're right in the sense that there are structural issues. You know, it has to be market-led. I completely agree with you. But at the same time, for a new industry, there also, I believe, needs to be certain government push in the beginning. So, you know, there were incentives for even personal EVs at some point, but then they were removed, I think, and then it came down to only commercial vehicles. I don't know what purpose that served. But anyway, we can keep talking about government policy till the end of the day. But I would like to come to Raghu and Dipti.
Sorry for intervention, Alokesh. I'm saying we should not have subsidies and other incentives, but you cannot sustain it for long term for the business to pick up. So somewhere even government will feel the pain and cut it off. So the business has to sustain by itself by customer accepting the product that he can value of.
I think one analogy which we may all agree to anything is new industry, new solution, new technology is like a newborn baby. Newborn baby requires more support and more hand holding, right? And then the person has to be on its own. So I think we all may agree probably on that point. So whatever you say, whatever technology we say, hybrid or fuel or electric, EV, whatever, it requires hand holding initially by all the stakeholders.
Absolutely. That is in fact what I was saying, that in the beginning it needs policy support. and then thereafter the market forces take over, and hopefully we will move properly in that direction. I want to come to Raghu and Deepti on the digital question, Raghu, that you were raising. Basically, if we look at operating models, you know, in India of automotive companies compared to overseas players, what are the strategic kind of responses that you're seeing from industry players in terms of moving towards greater digital adoption in their operating models? So Raghu and Deepti, this question is for both of you.
Go ahead, Dipti.
Yeah, so I think just as a summary of what everybody spoke about from a demand perspective, what we heard is right product at the right price, rural as a market. We heard about electric being the next big bet from an India market perspective, and also looking at, you know, the entire linkage of a seamless customer experience where the handshake between offline and online is something that is seamless. The other element, just to add to the industry, what we are seeing is the entire element of making sure that you can also disrupt the operating model from a sales perspective itself, right? And when I say you disrupt that operating model, it's about really questioning the way and the format of the ownership of the cars really exists today. So we are seeing a lot of people, a lot of OEMs actually trying to intervene in that process and see, can you actually disrupt and come up with something which is far more frugal in nature and can be adopted for the consumers. And the second one that we are seeing is really a shift to continue to engage with the customer at a broader segment right now. I mean, while every OEM is doing an intervention on making sure that digitally they are right up there, but whether we like it or not, the experiences are still broken, right? There is a lot of intervention that continues to be human-led, manual-led, and there is a broken insight to what is exactly happening. I wouldn't say even globally, a lot of OEMs have managed to crack this through and through, but there are some who have done it really, really seamlessly well. And I think that's the another shift that we are seeing. At least whichever organizations we are talking to, there is an agenda on the table which says that, how do I fix my broken experience? And our point of view has been very simple. Let's not try and fix everything, but even if you can take away the human intervention which creates that complexity, simplify it, automate it, digitize it, that itself will sort of create the trigger of what really needs to work well. And the other piece, which we're seeing, at least in my interaction, and Raghu, I'll open that up to you from an APAC perspective. What we're seeing is the shift of how do you constantly connect with the customers today online? Because online is no more about saying 10% of my digital sales comes from online. Everything comes from online. Any buyer who is looking for a car today goes online, is intelligent enough to do that research, and come back to you with a very, very sound sort of decision that he then lands up to a specific OEM, right? So it's no more and I think slowly that component has significantly grown. So how do you tie this entire process, whether it's through the digital marketing or whether it's making sure that the engagement really happens, is another element. The challenge, however, really is that all of this is what the OEM is investing in, but does the dealership really takes it in the same fashion and with the same priority? Because that is the gap whenever we've worked with the OEMs, is that there is enough that happens at the OEM side, but the same amount of adoption is not happening at the dealerships. So a format of how do you nurture these in a very, very innovative way at a touch point, in which we call as the physical touch point, where you get this prioritization right, is also an adoption that we're seeing. And these are the initiatives beyond, you know, the fact that yes, there is a stimulus by the government that is needed, but we do believe that these are the elements that will provide that sort of a boost that are becoming the strategic priorities for a lot of OEMs in our conversations with the industry.
Right. Raghu, would you want to take a stab at this?
Yeah, the only other thing I'll add is I think broadly we see two kinds of initiatives. There is initiatives around digital which are focused on, you know, bringing more digital technology into current processes or refining the processes. On the OEM side, a lot of it is on the front end, in the way that, you handle the customer through the entire life cycle. So there is digital around transforming the current processes. And then there are digital initiatives we see. Vijay talked about it briefly. How do you create new services? Instead of selling a battery, selling energy. So there is the second bucket, which is really the whole move from products to services. In whatever space I'm in, how do I leverage the data that I'm gathering to create new services out of it? It could be data I'm generating. It could be data I'm generating along with, let's say, some partners. There are tie-ups between suppliers and OEMs and telecom providers. How do you put together the data from, let's say, these 3 or 4 sources and create new services out of it? So those are the 2 broad buckets, I would say. How do you leverage digital to make the customer experience more seamless, more efficient, more effective? And then how do you leverage digital to create new products and services? So that's what I would add.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add another point. Yes, these may not be the direct demand drivers as we see today, but we heard Venkat talk about rural being one of the key drivers of where we are seeing the growth today. But if you actually look at the type of penetration that is available of the access, whether it's the medium or what people are really looking at, how they are looking at other industries and using technology or digital or as a platform, there is a definite space to really take this path to make sure that you start penetrating these markets better. Because at the end of the day, we also have to be cognizant of the fact that India as a country, we all operate in this pyramid, right? Where our ability to drive the automotive growth is always going to be the top of the pyramid. Middle of the pyramid, which is the low income and which is a large part of the Indian economy, will not be the stimulus to drive the growth. So identifying the right micro markets and taking an approach to reach them, not necessarily through a physical infrastructure, but through an approach which is a lot more agile, could be a very, very important growth driver.
Right. Thanks, Dipti, for that. Ashwath, I'll come to you. I'll go back to the discussion we were having on EVs. Geopolitics plays a huge role whenever we talk about cleaning up our mobility, moving towards cleaner forms of mobility. And here, as far as EVs in India is concerned, a large part of the components are dependent on imports from China. So how does that play out in the current geopolitical scenario between India and China? Is it an opportunity for you guys to develop things locally where you were dependent on China?
Yeah, I mean, for our company, it has not been much of a challenge because for us, less than 3% of the technology that we use comes in from China at this stage, and so the short term, of course, would be a challenge if it were a short term problem, but for a medium to long term, we could very quickly develop alternatives. But I think overall as a country, we are going to have to make more investments in India. We are going to have to develop relationships with partners in other parts of the world. We are going to have a more global supply chain, and for at least a medium term, cost is not going to have to be the only factor. Our markets are very, very, very cost focused, and which is why some of the rush to buy a lot of things from China has played a part in the recent past. But going in the future, yes, certainly people will look at other sources for these components. It represents an opportunity. Cummins as a company has been making significant investments and acquisitions around the world in acquiring this kind of technology, and certainly India is one of the big supply bases for Cummins for around the world. So we look at using India more as an opportunity. But again, you can't go away from the fundamentals of cost, quality, delivery. If you're not best at those, just because you are a strategic country doesn't mean you're entitled that automatically work will move towards you. You have to deliver on each of those metrics better than what other people in the world can do, including China. Otherwise, this is no, politics aside. At the ground level, it's finally cash which talks about how decisions are made.
Right. In fact, we are almost out of time today, but I will just ask one final question, which I'll open up to the entire group, and whosoever would feel comfortable to answer that. And the fact is that we also expect shared mobility, to make a strong comeback after the pandemic. So, are you in line with that expectation? Do you really expect that shared mobility to really again, become stronger than before? And part two is, does this impact your product strategy?
So if I can start, I would say, hey, listen, it seems we got distracted because of COVID for, let's say, 2 years, 2020 and 21. Let's talk about 2022 onwards. I think some fundamentals will not change, in my opinion. That people see why people why people believe in shared mobility. What's the fundamental reason? Basically, they don't want to invest in the assets, right? And they want to have it as per the convenience, and the cost is low. Those fundamentals do not change. So I think Uber and Ola's and those kind of companies, I think they have a bright future, in my opinion, and they will continue. And all right now at this point of time, because of the hygiene issues, obviously, this agenda is slightly different. Second, which I think Dipti tried to talk about, subscription model. That's again, change of ownership will happen. Subscription models are increasing. As an example, in MG, we have tied up with Miles 1 year back, and now with Zoom, and some OEMs are doing it already. And we are seeing already in enhancement of mobility as a service solution, or the change of ownership solution. So these are also demand drivers, and we didn't talk in detail. So both shared and subscription are here to stay. Yes, there is a pause for some time due to hygiene reasons and security reasons, but I think that's the future.
Thanks, Rajeev. I'll take the question to Martin. Martin, you say that people who buy Mercedes in India perhaps do not believe in shared mobility. They drive their Mercedes. But do you still think that it will gain ground post-COVID, shared mobility? And how does that impact your strategy? Product strategy?
There's multiple ways of shared mobility. There's the Olas and Ubers, and there is what's called subscription models, or maybe I say temporary ownerships. There is these models, and at the same time there is the asset-based ownership. I would believe a lot of our customers, they are still interested in owning a car, and since quite frankly most of them don't only own one car, they have several cars. And in the luxury segment, I would foresee that owning a Mercedes remains a brand, a statement many customers would want. But I can also see there's the one or other who might want a temporary ownership or wants some development in that area. So I can see also a trend there. Obviously, in our segment, is probably a little bit different than you would have it in the entry segment, where you have the mobility, the shared mobility, the taxi rides happening. So yes, I would see a stronger development in the shared mobility, but no, I don't see that this is the mega trend in the luxury segment.
Cool. Venkat, your view on this?
Yep. I think I concur or second what Rajeev said, that it is a pause, and I don't know whether it's 2022 or 23. I would not put a date to it, but shared mobility will expand and will grow, and not only in the urban, but it will also go beyond urban. So I would see a bright future for this market, and more or less subscription is there and it will continue to grow. But we need to see how well the subscription model in India would be more successful. But shared mobility is all set to grow, and it will continue to grow. And what is more important is that in shared mobility, I still have a question whether there will be a strong limitation of number of people, because in next 2 years or 3 years, because of coronavirus, there will be a culture that it will not be packed with people. So not more than 2 or 3 people will be accommodated, or there will be some policies from the government. So the vehicle ownership by the fleet or Ola Ubers will increase, and therefore our business will also increase. So that's the perception with which I'm running today.
I'll go to Vijay with that question about shared mobility. Do you share in Venkat's optimism?
Yes, I believe case has a strong case in the medium and long-term future. But probably the A would be a small a, not a capital A. The autonomy or autonomous driving will have probably a longer way to go in terms of technology breakthroughs. I think we'll figure out solutions for COVID-related risks, whether it is vaccination or COVID-safe technologies on the vehicle side also.
Cool. Ashwath, your closing comments on this?
I think everyone has said enough on this, and I think I agree with them. There will certainly be more of a push from a capex model to an opex model. So certainly subscription should go up, leases should go up, financing methods would change quite significantly. But the basic nature of people does not change just because you have one or two events. And as the prosperity of India increases, people will want choice and they will want to use all of these models and case is certainly moving ahead. So I would wholeheartedly agree with the panel here.
Thank you, Ashwath. We really hope that the prosperity of India and Indians increase so that I can move beyond my Maruti. Maruti is not here, so I can say this, and perhaps buy an MG, a Renault, and finally perhaps a Mercedes one day. But anyway, away from that aspirational talk, we'll go to Dipti. Dipti, it's been an exhilarating conversation. We'd request you to summarize this conversation today.
So firstly, thank you, everybody. I think it's been a very engaging an hour and a half, and it's been great connecting with you. Thank you also for sharing your insights and your strategic priorities on what's your imperatives of making sure that this industry sees a boost. And I'm very glad. So in summary, I think we all agree that yes, there are stimuluses which as an industry from a country perspective, government needs to look at, but there are enough and more initiatives as mentioned by Rajeev, Martin, yourself, Vijay, Ashwath, and Venkat that you guys are taking to drive it, and those could be in the space of rural as a focus, it could be digital to really drive the front end, or could be the product innovations that Rajeev really pointed about. Thank you so much for your time, and these insights would really help us to take a step back and look at what is the next disruption that should really change the industry. As someone says, when you're not winning in the game, change the rules of the game. So I think that's where we are today. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Dipti. Thank you, Dipti. Thanks to all the panelists. Thank you very, very much. The difference that it makes in the conversation is that it needs to be engaging, which I think today we covered a wide range of areas. And Rajeev, special mention to you. I really like people like you who come and talk candid, and you get the others also to get out of their shell and start talking candid. So it's wonderful. It makes a huge difference to a panel. Wish you all the very best in your in your business and your sales. And thank you very, very much for sparing time with us. We will stay connected with you. My team will share with you all the output that we will generate from this. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Have a nice day. Bye.